They say you should never invite an ex to your wedding, but Eleanor Hoyer thought she was above the rules. She didn't just invite her son's ex-girlfriend to humiliate her. She wanted to flaunt her victory. She wanted Serena to see the billion-dollar merger disguised as a marriage. But Eleanor forgot one thing. Time changes people. When the church doors opened, Serena didn't walk in crying. She didn't walk in alone. She walked in with 2 children who had the Hoyer eyes, and a secret that would burn the entire Hoyer empire to the ground in less than an hour. Grab your popcorn, because what happened at the altar wasn't just a wedding. It was an execution. The air inside the Hoyer estate tasted like expensive champagne and old money, a mixture that usually signaled a celebration, but today felt more like a suffocation. Ronald Hoyer, 29 years old, and heir to a shipping logistics fortune that spanned 3 continents, stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite. He adjusted his silk bow tie, his fingers trembling just enough to be noticeable. Outside, the Atlantic Ocean crashed against the cliffs of Newport, a violent grey backdrop to what was supposed to be the wedding of the decade. Inside, the room was silent, save for the ticking of a grandfather clock that had belonged to a French king. "Stop fidgeting, Ronald. You look like a schoolboy waiting for the principal," a sharp voice cut through the silence. Ronald didn't turn around. He watched in the reflection as his mother, Eleanor Hoyer, glided into the room. At 62, Eleanor was a terrifying monument to preservation and power. She wore a dress of silver gunmetal that cost more than most people's homes, her hair coiffed into an immovable helmet of platinum blonde. She didn't look like a mother on her son's wedding day. She looked like a general inspecting the troops before a slaughter. "I'm not fidgeting, Mother," Ronald lied, his voice hollow. "I'm just thinking." Eleanor reached up and aggressively straightened his lapel, her diamond rings flashing under the chandelier light. "Don't think, darling. It's never been your strong suit. Leave the thinking to me. Today is about optics. It's about merging Hoyer logistics with the St. James textile empire. It is about legacy." Ronald pulled away slightly. "Is that all Tiffany is to you? A merger?" Eleanor laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Oh, grow up, Ronald. Tiffany St. James is beautiful, pedigreed and educated at the Sorbonne. She speaks 3 languages and knows which fork to use for escargot. She is a wife. That girl you were with before, what was her name? That waitress?" "Serena," Ronald said, the name catching in his throat like a jagged piece of glass. "She wasn't a waitress. She was an art curator in training. And you know her name." "Serena." Eleanor tasted the name like it was spoiled milk. The girl from the trailer park in Ohio. The one who wore polyester to the opera. "We saved you, Ronald. I saved you. Imagine if you had married her. You'd be living in a 2-bedroom walk-up in Brooklyn, pretending to be happy while she painted fruit bowls." Ronald looked out the window. It had been 4 years. 4 years since Serena Hart had vanished from his life overnight. He remembered the fight, the screaming match where she accused him of being a puppet, and he accused her of not understanding the pressure of his world. He remembered waking up the next morning to an empty apartment and a note that simply said, "You chose your cage. Enjoy it." "She's coming today, you know." Eleanor dropped the bomb casually, checking her makeup in the mirror. Ronald spun around, his face draining of color. "What?" "I invited her," Eleanor said, smiling at her own reflection. "Why?" Ronald's voice rose. "Why would you do that? You hated her. You spent 3 years trying to break us up." "Because, my dear boy, I am a benevolent winner," Eleanor turned to him, her eyes cold and hard. "I wanted her to see this. I wanted her to see Tiffany. I wanted her to see the life she was never good enough for. It's closure, Ronald. For you, and for her. Mostly for her. It's important the poor understand their place in the ecosystem. You're sick, Ronald whispered. I'm practical, Eleanor snapped. Now, fix your face. The St. James family is waiting. And if I see you looking at that trash when she walks in, I will cut you out of the trust before the cake is cut. Do you understand me? Ronald nodded, the fight draining out of him as it always did. He was a man who had everything: money, looks, status. But he possessed the backbone of a jellyfish when it came to Eleanor Hoyer. Downstairs, the guests were arriving. Senators, tech moguls, and socialites filled the lawn. The canopy was draped in white orchids imported from Thailand that morning. It was perfect. It was expensive. It was a lie. And somewhere in that crowd, or perhaps on her way, was Serena. Ronald's heart hammered against his ribs. He hadn't seen her face in 160 days. He told himself he hated her for leaving. He told himself he loved Tiffany. But as the organ music began to swell downstairs, Ronald Hoyer realized he was terrified. Not because he was getting married, but because he knew, deep down, that the moment he saw Serena Hart, the carefully constructed fortress of his life was going to crack. To understand the carnage that was about to unfold in Newport, you have to understand the silence of the library at Columbia University 4 years prior. That was where Eleanor Hoyer had first decided that Serena Hart had to be destroyed. It wasn't that Serena was rude. It wasn't that she was unintelligent. It was that she was invulnerable to Eleanor's usual weapons. Serena didn't care about the Hamptons. She didn't care about the Hoyer name. She loved Ronald for the shy, nerdy boy he was underneath the trust fund, and that made her dangerous. A wife who couldn't be bought was a wife who couldn't be controlled. The breakup hadn't happened the way Ronald remembered it. Ronald remembered a fight about his mother's birthday party. He remembered Serena calling him a coward. But the real end happened on a Tuesday afternoon at a French bistro on the Upper East Side, while Ronald was in a board meeting. Eleanor sat across from Serena. Serena was wearing a thrifted blazer, her sketchbook on the table. She looked nervous, but defiant. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Miss Hart," Eleanor had said, sliding a sleek black envelope across the table. Inside this envelope is a check for $500,000. It is enough to pay off your student loans, buy a studio, and start your life over, anywhere but here. Serena hadn't touched the envelope. She stared at Eleanor with eyes that were a startling shade of green. "I'm not a prostitute, Mrs. Hoyer. I don't take payment for leaving people I love." "Love?" Eleanor scoffed. "You think this is love?" "You are a novelty to him, a rebellion. He is playing commoner with you. But eventually, he will need to return to his world. And when he does, you will be the anchor dragging him down. He will resent you. He will cheat on you, and I will encourage him to do so." "I trust Ronald," Serena said, though her voice wavered. "Do you?" Eleanor leaned in. "Then why hasn't he told you about the St. James merger? Why hasn't he told you that his father's will stipulates he must marry a woman of equivalent standing to inherit the CEO position? He is choosing between you and his legacy, Serena. Don't make him hate you for costing him his birthright." It was a lie, a fabrication. The will said no such thing, but Serena didn't know that. "I want to hear it from him," Serena said, standing up. "Sit down," Eleanor commanded. She pulled out her phone. "If you leave this table without that check, I will ensure that your father, who I believe is currently up for parole in Ohio, finds his application denied." I have friends in the judicial system, Serena. Very powerful friends. You leave Ronald tonight. You make it messy. You make him hate you. And your father walks free next month. You stay, and your father rots. Serena's face had turned pale. It was the one lever Eleanor knew she could pull. Serena's father had made mistakes, but Serena was devoted to him. "You're a monster," Serena whispered, tears pooling in her eyes. "I'm a mother protecting her investment," Eleanor replied, taking a sip of her Pinot Grigio. "Take the check. Break his heart. Save your father." Serena took the check, but she didn't cash it. She tore it into pieces and left it in the ashtray. "I'll leave," Serena said, her voice shaking with a rage that could level cities. "Not for the money, but because if he comes from a woman like you, he's already poisoned. But hear me, Eleanor. The world is round. What you do in the dark will come out in the light." That night, Serena picked a fight with Ronald. She screamed things she didn't mean. She told him he was weak. She told him she was bored. She broke his heart so thoroughly that he didn't even try to stop her when she packed her bags. 2 weeks later, Serena found out she was pregnant. She called Ronald. Eleanor answered the phone. "He doesn't want to talk to you." Eleanor had lied, her voice smooth. "And if you're calling to beg, don't. He's with Tiffany now, he's happy." I need to tell him something," Serena had stammered. "Is it about money?" Eleanor asked. "No, it's—" "Never mind." Serena hung up. Eleanor blocked the number. She deleted the call log. She never told Ronald. 4 years passed. Ronald hardened. He became the cold corporate shark Eleanor wanted. He agreed to marry Tiffany St. James, a woman who had the personality of a piece of unbuttered toast, but the bank account of a small nation. And then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Eleanor, feeling drunk on her own power, had found Serena's address. She sent the invitation with a handwritten note. "Come see what a real woman looks like." She expected Serena to burn it. She expected Serena to cry. She did not expect the RSVP card to come back 3 days later with a check mark next to accepts. And she certainly didn't expect what Serena had been doing for the last 4 years. The atmosphere on the lawn was electric, but for the wrong reasons. The guests were whispering. News had travelled fast. Eleanor Hoyer had invited the ex. Tiffany St. James, the bride, was in the bridal suite, screaming at a makeup artist. "You made my eyes look puffy," Tiffany shrieked, throwing a blending sponge across the room. Tiffany was 30, blonde, and possessed a beauty that was entirely purchased. She was the perfect match for the Hoyers, vain, shallow, and obsessed with status. "It's just the lighting, Mom," the makeup artist stammered. "Fix it," Tiffany snapped. She turned to her maid of honor, a girl named Jessica, who she secretly hated. "Can you believe that hag is coming? Ronald's ex? Why did Eleanor invite her?" Jessica asked, pouring Tiffany a mimosa. "To assert dominance?" Tiffany laughed cruelly. "Eleanor told me. She wants to see the look on that girl's face when she sees my ring. It's a 10-carat flawless emerald cut. Ronald said his ex wore a cubic zirconia promise ring. It's pathetic, really." Tiffany walked to the window and looked down at the guests arriving. "I hope she wore something from Target. I want the contrast to be brutal. I want her to know that she is nothing." Down on the lawn, the music shifted. The ceremony was about to begin. The guests took their seats. The groom, Ronald, stood at the altar. He looked nauseous. He kept scanning the back row. "Eyes front," his best man, a hedge fund manager named Brad, hissed. "You look like you're looking for a sniper." I have a bad feeling," Ronald muttered. "It's just nerves. You're marrying the St. James heiress. You're merging 2 dynasties. Relax. You've won the game of life, buddy." Ronald didn't feel like a winner. He felt like a man walking the plank. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd. It wasn't the polite silence of a wedding starting. It was the confused, stunned silence of a disruption. Ronald looked up. At the very back of the garden, the oversized iron gates swung open. Security had been instructed to let everyone with an invite in, but they looked hesitant. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, not one from the Hoyer fleet, rolled slowly onto the gravel driveway. It was sleek, custom, and brand new. "Who is that?" Eleanor hissed from the front row. "The governor is already here." The car stopped. The driver, a large man in a sharp suit, got out and opened the rear door. First, a pair of red-bottomed Christian Louboutin heels hit the gravel. Then, a woman stepped out. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. It was Serena. But it wasn't the Serena Ronald remembered. The girl in the thrift store blazers was gone. This woman was a vision of lethal elegance. She wore a tailored blood-red dress that clung to her figure. Sophisticated but undeniably sexy. A revenge dress that made Princess Diana's look like a bathrobe. Her hair was sleek and straight, her makeup flawless. She radiated a kind of power that money can't buy, the power of someone who has walked through fire and survived. But she wasn't alone. From the other side of the car, the driver helped 2 children out. Twins, a boy and a girl, holding hands. They looked to be about 3 or 4 years old. The boy wore a miniature tuxedo. The girl wore a dress that matched Serena's. They had dark, curly hair. They had Ronald's nose. And even from 50 yards away, Ronald could see they had the Hoyer blue eyes. The silence was so heavy it felt physical. Serena didn't look at the ground. She didn't look at the guests. She walked straight down the center aisle, holding a child in each hand, her head held high. She looked directly at Eleanor Hoyer. Eleanor's face had gone from smug satisfaction to a mask of absolute horror. She gripped her purse so hard her knuckles turned white. "Oh my God," someone whispered in the third row. "Are those—" Ronald felt his knees buckle. The world tilted on its axis. He forgot Tiffany. He forgot the merger. He forgot the guests. He only saw the woman he had never stopped loving, and the 2 children who looked exactly like him. Serena stopped 10 feet from where Eleanor sat. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and ready for war. "Hello, Eleanor." Serena's voice carried through the silent garden, smooth and confident. "You sent an invitation. I thought it would be rude not to bring the grandchildren you've never met." The glass in Ronald's hand slipped and shattered on the marble altar steps. The sound of Ronald's champagne flute shattering on the stone steps echoed like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The organist, confused by the sudden tension, let out a low, dissonant chord before trailing off into silence. Ronald didn't care about the glass. He didn't care about the custom Italian loafers now stained with champagne. He stepped off the altar, bypassing his mother, his eyes locked on the 2 small children standing at the end of the aisle. "Ronald!" Eleanor hissed, grabbing his forearm with a grip that bruised. "Do not take another step. This is a stunt, a pathetic, desperate stunt by a woman looking for a payout." Ronald ripped his arm away with a force that made Eleanor stumble back in her heels. "Look at them, Mother," he said, his voice trembling. "Just look at them." He walked down the aisle. The guests, a sea of pastel designer dresses and linen suits, parted for him, their necks craning to get a better view. The whispers were starting, a rising tide of scandal. "Is that her? The ex?" "The kids. They have the Hoyer chin. This is a disaster. I love it." Ronald stopped 3 feet from Serena. Up close, the resemblance was devastating. The boy, Leo, stared up at him with wide, curious eyes, eyes that were the exact shade of grey-blue that Ronald saw in the mirror every morning. The girl, Maya, was shy, hiding her face in the folds of Serena's red dress, clutching a small stuffed rabbit that looked well-worn. Serena stood like a statue. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't smile. She looked at Ronald with the detached assessment of an art critic looking at a forgery. "Serena?" Ronald breathed, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might crack a rib. "Are they?" "Don't ask questions you already know the answer to, Ronald," Serena said coolly. "Meet Leo and Maya. They turn 4 next month." 4. Ronald did the math instantly. The breakup, the timeline. "You never told me," he whispered, a tear escaping his eye. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," Serena said, her voice raising just enough for the first few rows to hear. "I called. Your mother answered. She told me you wanted nothing to do with me. She told me you were already with Tiffany. She said if I contacted you again, she'd bury me in legal fees until I starved." Ronald spun around to face Eleanor, who had marched down the aisle to join them, her face a mask of fury. "She's lying!" Eleanor shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "She's a gold digger, Ronald. She probably picked those children up from a casting agency. Look at her clothes. Look at the car. Where would a waitress get a Rolls-Royce? It's a rental. It's all a show." Serena laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was the laugh of someone who held all the aces. A casting agency. Serena reached into her clutch, a limited edition Hermes that cost more than the average car, and pulled out a folded document. She didn't hand it to Ronald. She handed it to the best man, Brad, who had wandered down, slack-jawed. "Read it, Brad," Serena commanded. Brad unfolded the paper. His eyes widened. It's a paternity test. Accredited lab. 99.999% match. Ronald is the father." "Fabricated," Eleanor screamed. "Security, get this trash off my lawn." 2 large security guards stepped forward, but before they could touch Serena, the driver of the Rolls-Royce stepped in. He moved with the blur of a professional. In a second, he was between Serena and the Hoyer security, his hand resting casually inside his jacket, in a way that suggested he was armed and authorized. "I wouldn't," the driver said. His voice was low, gravelly, and terrifying. "Who are you?" Eleanor demanded. "My name is Arthur," the man said. "I'm head of security for Hart International, and Mrs. Hart Vandermeer is not to be touched." Hart Vandermeer. The name rippled through the crowd. A senator in the 3rd row stood up. "Vandermeer, as in Julian Vandermeer, the Dutch shipping magnate?" Serena nodded to the senator. "He was my late husband. He passed away 2 years ago. He left me everything, including his shipping empire. Which, if I'm not mistaken, Eleanor." Serena turned her gaze back to the older woman. "Is currently about 3 times the size of Hoyer Logistics." The color drained from Eleanor's face. Serena wasn't just an ex-girlfriend anymore. She was a competitor. A shark who had just swum into their pond and revealed she was a megalodon. "I didn't come here to stop the wedding," Serena said, smoothing her son's hair. "I came here because my children asked where their father was, and I thought they should see him. I wanted them to see the man who was too weak to fight for their mother, and too blind to see his own mother's wickedness." At that moment, the double doors of the estate burst open. Tiffany St. James had finally emerged. She was wearing a dress that had cost $50,000, a confection of lace and pearls. She expected the wedding march. She expected gasps of adoration. Instead, she walked out into a scene of absolute chaos. She saw the Rolls-Royce. She saw the woman in the red dress standing next to her groom. She saw the children. "What is going on?" Tiffany screamed, her voice piercing the air. She gathered her heavy skirts and stomped down the stairs, her veil trailing behind her like an angry cloud. She pushed past a stunned bridesmaid and grabbed Ronald's arm. "Who is this? Ronald, why aren't you at the altar? Who are these people?" She looked at Serena, sneering. "Oh, it's you, the charity case." Tiffany looked at the twins. "And you brought... what? Baggage?" Serena looked at Tiffany with genuine pity. "Hello, Tiffany. I see you're still wearing the ring Ronald bought with his mother's credit card." "How dare you!" Tiffany raised a hand to slap Serena. Ronald caught Tiffany's wrist in mid-air. "Don't," Ronald said. His voice was different now, harder. "Don't you dare touch her!" Tiffany gasped, trying to yank her hand back. "You're defending her. On our wedding day. Ronald, look at me. I am a St. James. If you humiliate me, my father will pull the merger. You will be ruined." "The merger," Serena interrupted, looking bored. "Yes, let's talk about that." She gestured to Arthur, her driver. He reached into the car and pulled out a thick leather portfolio. "You see?" Serena addressed the crowd, her voice projecting clearly. "There's a reason Eleanor was so desperate for this wedding to happen today. It wasn't about legacy, it wasn't about love, it was about bankruptcy." Gasps erupted from the guests. Eleanor lunged for the portfolio, but Ronald stepped in front of her, blocking his mother. "Let her speak," Ronald said, staring his mother down. "Hoyer Logistics is insolvent," Serena announced, dropping the bomb. "They have been cooking the books for 5 years. They are hemorrhaging money." "This marriage? It's a bailout. Tiffany's dowry and the St. James textile assets were the only things keeping the Hoyer ships in the water." She turned to Tiffany. "He's not marrying you, Tiffany. He's selling himself to you to keep his mother out of federal prison." Tiffany froze. She looked at Ronald. "Is that true?" Ronald looked at the ground. I didn't know about the insolvency, but I knew we needed the cash. Mother said it was for expansion." "It was for debt," Serena corrected. "And here is the best part." She opened the portfolio. "The St. James family isn't doing much better, are they, Tiffany?" Tiffany went pale. "I did my due diligence," Serena smiled, a shark's smile. "The St. James textile mills in Southeast Asia were seized last week due to regulatory violations. Tiffany's father is broke, too. This isn't a merger of power. It's 2 drowning people grabbing each other and hoping they float." The silence on the lawn was total. The illusion of wealth, the wedding of the decade, had been stripped naked in under 5 minutes. Eleanor was shaking. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape, a lie, anything. "She's lying. She's jealous. Security. Police." "I'm not lying," Serena said calmly. "I own the debt." "What?" Eleanor whispered. "Vandermeer Shipping bought the Hoyer debt packages from the banks this morning," Serena said. "I own your mortgage, Eleanor. I own your company loans. Technically, I think I even own this house." She took a step closer to the woman who had ruined her life 4 years ago. "You told me I wasn't good enough for your world," Serena hissed. "So I bought your world." The wedding was officially over. The guests were no longer guests. They were an audience to a corporate execution. Phones were out. The live stream was probably already trending on Twitter. Tiffany St. James had collapsed onto a garden bench, sobbing into her tulle, realizing she wasn't becoming a billionaire's wife, but rather a meme. Her parents were furiously typing on their phones, likely trying to liquidate assets before the news hit Wall Street. But the real drama was in the center of the aisle. Ronald looked at Serena. He saw the woman he loved, but she was armored in success and resentment. He looked at the twins, who were watching the adult scream with wide, frightened eyes. He knelt down. He ignored his mother's screeching background noise and leveled himself with the children. "Hi," he said softly. The boy, Leo, blinked. Are you my daddy? The question broke Ronald into 1,000 pieces. Yes, he choked out. Yes, Leo, I am. Mommy says you work on big boats, Leo said. I do, Ronald smiled through tears. I do work on boats. Can I see one? You can see all of them, Ronald promised. Don't make promises you can't keep, Ronald, Serena warned, stepping between them. You are still Eleanor's son. You are still the man who let me walk away. I didn't know. Ronald stood up, his voice cracking. Serena, I swear to God, I didn't know about the baby. If I had known... If you had known... What? Serena challenged. You would have left her? You would have stood up to your mother? You were 25 years old, Ronald. You were a grown man, and you let Mommy dictate who you were allowed to love. That is why I left. Not the money. The cowardice. I am not a coward anymore, Ronald said. Prove it, Serena said. How? Serena pointed to Eleanor. She intercepted my calls. That's fraud. She falsified documents to the bank to get those loans. That's federal crime. But the worst thing she did? She lied to you about your grandfather's will. Eleanor lunged. She actually physically lunged at Serena, her fingernails aimed at Serena's face. Shut up! You shut your mouth, you gutter trash! Arthur, the security guard, caught Eleanor's wrist effortlessly. He held her there, a flailing, screaming woman in a couture gown. It was pathetic. Let her go, Arthur, Serena said. Let her hear this. Serena pulled another document from the portfolio. It was yellowed, old. I found this in the Hoyer archives when my company did the acquisition audit, Serena said. This is the original last will and testament of Archibald Hoyer, your grandfather. Ronald frowned. Mother told me the will said I had to marry a woman of standing to inherit the CEO title. A lie, Serena said. A fabrication she created to force you into a marriage she could control. She knew Tiffany was weak. She knew Tiffany would let Eleanor run the company from the shadows. Serena held up the paper. The will actually says, the control of the Hoyer Trust and all voting shares shall pass to the first male heir of the direct Hoyer line upon their 30th birthday. However, should a grandchild be born to the direct line before the heir turns 30, the trust shall immediately be placed in guardianship for said grandchild, to be administered by the child's parents, bypassing the current heir entirely. The legal jargon hung in the air. Ronald looked at Leo. Leo is the first grandchild, Ronald whispered. He was born before I turned 30. Exactly, Serena said. Ronald, you don't own the company. Eleanor doesn't own the company. She pointed at the little boy in the tuxedo, who was currently trying to catch a butterfly. Leo owns the company. Eleanor let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. She collapsed onto the grass. Her entire life's work, the manipulation, the lies, the cruelty, had all been undone by biology. By trying to keep Serena away, she had ensured that Serena's son became the owner of everything Eleanor coveted. Because Leo is a minor, Serena continued, the trust is administered by his parents. That means me, and you, if you sign the birth certificate. Serena looked at Ronald. I hold 50% of the voting rights for your family empire, Ronald, and I bought the debt. I effectively own you. I could dissolve this company tomorrow. I could sell the assets for scrap. I could burn this house down. She stepped closer, her perfume, jasmine and rain, filling Ronald's senses. But I'm not Eleanor, she said softly. I don't destroy family. I protect it. She looked at Tiffany, who was watching from the bench. Tiffany, you can go. The wedding is off. The groom is unavailable. And frankly, you can't afford him anymore. Tiffany didn't argue. She stood up, kicked off her heels and ran barefoot across the lawn toward the parking lot, weeping. Ronald looked at his mother, huddled on the grass, defeated. He looked at the guests, who were staring at Serena with a mixture of fear and awe. "What happens now?" Ronald asked. "Now?" Serena checked her watch, a diamond Cartier. "Now, we have a decision to make. You can stay here, in this house, with that woman who lied to you your whole life. You can sink with the Hoyer ship." She signaled Arthur, who opened the door of the Rolls-Royce. "Or," Serena said, offering a hand to Maya and Leo, "you can come with us. We're going to get burgers. Leo loves burgers. And we can talk about how you're going to earn the right to be a father to these children." Ronald looked at Eleanor. She looked up at him, mascara running down her face. "Ronald," she rasped, "don't you dare. After everything I did for you." "Everything you did to me," Ronald corrected. He reached up and untied his silk bow tie. He let it fall to the grass. He took off his tuxedo jacket and dropped it on top of the bow tie. "Goodbye, Mother," Ronald said. He walked over to the Rolls-Royce. He knelt down and picked up Maya. She didn't cry. She touched his face with a small hand. "You look like Leo," she whispered. "I do." Ronald laughed, a sound of pure liberation. He got into the car. Serena got in beside him. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing them in a quiet, leather-scented cocoon, leaving the noise and the scandal outside. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away, crunching over the gravel, Ronald didn't look back at the mansion. He didn't look back at the mother screaming his name. He just looked at the two children in the booster seats, and the woman who had burned his world down to save him. But the story wasn't over. Eleanor Hoyer was down. But a snake is most dangerous when it's cornered. And she had one last secret, one last weapon she had been saving for a rainy day. And it was pouring. The penthouse overlooking Central Park was a world away from the suffocating gloom of the Hoyer estate in Newport. Here, the light was natural, the furniture was modern, and the air was filled with the sound of cartoons and children laughing. Ronald Hoyer sat on a plush rug, assembling a complex Lego castle with Leo. In 3 months, Ronald had undergone a transformation. The stiff, terrified man in the tuxedo was gone. In his place was a man who wore jeans, who had learned how to make pancakes in the shape of Mickey Mouse, and who was slowly, painfully earning back the trust of the woman he loved. They weren't together. Not officially. Serena was too smart for that. She had given him a guest room and a job at Hart Vandermeer, an entry-level logistics analyst role, which he took without complaint. But she kept her heart behind a wall of reinforced steel. "Daddy, the flag goes here," Leo chirped, jamming a plastic piece onto the spire. "Good eye, buddy," Ronald smiled. The elevator doors opened directly into the foyer. Serena walked in, looking exhausted. She dropped her briefcase and kicked off her heels. "Bad day?" Ronald asked, looking up. "Strange day." Serena rubbed her temples. "Our acquisition of the Hoyer debt is being audited. Again. Someone is pushing the SEC to look into insider trading. They think you fed me confidential info to tank the stock so I could buy it cheap." Ronald frowned. "That's ridiculous. I didn't even know you were the buyer until the wedding." "I know," Serena sighed, walking over to pour herself a glass of water. "But someone is feeding the regulators a different story, and I can guess who." Suddenly the intercom buzzed. It was the concierge. "Ms. Hart, there are authorities here to see you, and a Mrs. Hoyer." Serena froze. Ronald stood up, his face hardening. "Send them up," Serena said, her voice icy. Moments later, the elevator opened. Eleanor Hoyer stepped out. She looked different than she had at the wedding. The defeat was gone. She was dressed in a sharp navy suit, her hair perfect, a smug smile plastered on her face. Behind her were 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in a grey suit holding a clipboard. "Hello, Serena," Eleanor said, stepping into the living room as if she owned it. "Cute apartment. A bit nouveau riche, but cozy." "Get out, Mother," Ronald said, stepping in front of the twins. "You aren't welcome here." "Oh, I'm not here for a social call," Eleanor chuckled. She turned to the officers. "That's him, the grandfather." The officers moved past Ronald and Serena. To everyone's shock, they weren't heading for Serena. They were heading for the kitchen, where Serena's father, Frank Hart, was making a sandwich. Frank had been out of prison for 2 months. He was a gentleman who had made bad choices in his youth, but he was currently living quietly with Serena, enjoying his grandkids. "Frank Hart?" one officer asked. "Yes?" Frank looked terrified. "We have a warrant for your arrest," the officer said, pulling out cuffs. "Violation of parole, possession with intent to distribute." "What?" Serena screamed, rushing forward. "That's impossible. He's been here all day. He's been clean for 5 years." "We received an anonymous tip," the officer said, spinning Frank around. "We checked his vehicle downstairs. We found 2 kilos of cocaine in the trunk." "My car?" Frank stammered. "I haven't driven in a week." "It's a set-up," Ronald shouted. "She planted it. Look at her." Eleanor feigned shock. "Me? I simply reported suspicious activity. I have a civic duty, Ronald. And it seems Serena is harboring a felon who is dealing drugs out of the same home where my grandchildren live." She turned to the woman with the clipboard. "Ms. Davies, as we discussed." Ms. Davies, a Child Protective Services caseworker, stepped forward. "Ms. Hart, given the arrest of a resident in the home for narcotics distribution and the presence of minors, we have to make an immediate assessment of the children's safety." "You are not taking my children," Serena growled, her voice low and dangerous. She looked like a lioness ready to kill. "Oh, they won't go to foster care," Eleanor smiled sweetly. "As the biological grandmother, I have filed an emergency petition for temporary custody. I have a suitable home. I have staff. And unlike this environment, my home is drug-free." "You did this," Ronald walked up to his mother, shaking with rage. "You planted those drugs in Frank's car." "Prove it," Eleanor whispered, leaning in so only he could hear. "You have no money, Ronald. You have no power. I have judges in my pocket. I have the police commissioner on speed dial. Did you really think you could humiliate me and walk away? I am Eleanor Hoyer. I always win." She stepped back and addressed Serena. "Here is the deal. You sign over the voting rights to the Hoyer Trust back to me, fully and irrevocably, and drop the debt enforcement. If you do that, I might be able to hire a very good lawyer for your father. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe the charges go away. And the children stay here." "Blackmail," Serena hissed. "Business," Eleanor corrected. "You have 1 hour to decide. Save your father and your custody, or keep the company. Clock's ticking." The police dragged a confused and weeping Frank out of the apartment. Ms. Davies stood by the door, waiting. The room fell silent. The twins started to cry. Serena sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. Eleanor had found the one weakness Serena couldn't buy her way out of: her family. If Frank went back to prison, it would kill him. And if CPS took the kids, Serena couldn't risk it. "I'll sign," Serena whispered, defeated. "Just don't take them. Don't hurt my dad." "Smart girl," Eleanor grinned. "No," Ronald said. Everyone looked at him. Ronald wasn't looking at Eleanor. He was looking at Arthur, the head of security, who was standing quietly in the corner. "Arthur," Ronald said calmly. "Did you sweep the garage this morning?" Arthur nodded. 0600 hours. Standard protocol. And? The trunk of Mr. Hart's car was empty, Arthur said. We have video surveillance of the garage interior, 24/7 feed, cloud backup. Eleanor's smile faltered. Video can be doctored. Not this video, Ronald said. He pulled out his phone. Because I didn't trust you, Mother. I knew you'd come. I just didn't know how. He tapped the screen and held it up. Arthur, pull up the footage from 10:00 a.m. today. Arthur tapped his tablet and cast the video to the giant flat-screen TV on the wall. The room watched in silence. On the screen, a black sedan pulled up next to Frank's car in the parking garage. A man in a hoodie got out. He looked around nervously. He popped the trunk of Frank's car using a slim gym tool and dropped a duffel bag inside. Then, the man turned. He pulled down his hood to wipe sweat off his forehead. Pause, Ronald commanded. The image froze. The man's face was clearly visible. That's your driver, Mother, Ronald said softly. Jenkins, the one who replaced me when I left. Eleanor went pale. That's not... It is, Ronald said. And here is the best part. He looked at the CPS worker. Miss Davies, is it? You might want to step back, because you are currently an accessory to a felony frame-up involving a minor. Miss Davies looked at the screen, then at Eleanor, and backed away towards the door. I was told this was a legitimate tip. I'm leaving. Officer! Ronald yelled to the remaining policeman who hadn't escorted Frank down yet. Look at the screen. That is the woman who called in the tip. That is her driver planting the evidence. This is a false report, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. The officer looked at the TV. He looked at Eleanor. The resemblance between the driver and Eleanor's well-known staff was undeniable. Mrs. Hoyer, the officer said, his hand moving to his radio. I think you need to stay right here. Eleanor panicked. She grabbed her purse. This is absurd. It's a deep fake. You're all crazy. She turned to run, but she found her path blocked. Serena was standing there. She wasn't crying anymore. You threatened my father, Serena said, her voice shaking with quiet fury. You tried to take my children. You came into my home. Get out of my way, Eleanor spat. No, Serena said. Arthur, Serena called out. Call the district attorney. Tell him we have evidence of the Hoyer narcotics frame-up. And tell him I'm ready to press charges regarding the embezzlement at Hoyer Logistics too. Everything. The full file. No, Eleanor shrieked. You can't. That will ruin the family name. You ruined the name, Ronald said, stepping up beside Serena. He took Serena's hand. For the first time in 4 years, she squeezed it back. The Hoyer name is done, Ronald said. It's time for something new. The trial of Eleanor Hoyer was not the trial of the century because it didn't last long enough. Faced with 4K video evidence of the frame-up, the testimony of her own driver, who flipped on her immediately for a reduced sentence, and a mountain of forensic accounting evidence provided by Serena, Eleanor's high-priced lawyers advised her to plead guilty. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and perverting the course of justice. The judge, a woman who didn't care about the Hoyer social standing, noted that Eleanor's arrogance was only exceeded by her incompetence. The Hoyer estate in Newport was seized to pay off the creditors. It was bought by a hotel chain and turned into a wedding venue. The irony was lost on no one. 1 year later, the wind on the deck of the yacht was warm. It wasn't a Hoyer yacht. It was the flagship of the newly rebranded Hart Hoyer Global. Ronald stood at the railing, holding a glass of juice. He watched the coastline of Italy drift by. He wasn't the CEO. Serena was. Ronald was the chief operations officer. He was good at it. He liked the details, the logistics, the puzzle of it. He liked that he didn't have to be the face of the company. He liked that he earned his paycheck. Thinking again? Ronald turned. Serena was walking toward him. She wore a white sundress and looked younger, lighter than she had in years. Just remembering, Ronald said. The last time I was on a boat this big, I was miserable. And now? Serena asked, leaning against him. Now. Ronald looked down at the main deck. Leo and Maya were chasing Frank Hart around the jacuzzi. Frank was laughing, healthy and free. The twins were 5 now, loud and happy, and completely unaware that they were the heirs to a fortune. To them, life was just sun, sea, and family. Now I have everything, Ronald said. He looked at Serena. I'm still working on the worthy part, though. Serena took his hand. She twisted the simple gold band he wore on his finger. Not a wedding ring, but a promise ring. They hadn't married. They didn't need to. They were partners in every sense of the word. You showed up, Serena said softly, when it mattered. You stood between me and the monster. You chose us over the money. That's all I ever wanted, Ronald. It took me too long, he admitted. Maybe, Serena smiled, kissing his cheek. But you got there, and the view is pretty good, isn't it? Ronald wrapped his arm around her. They watched the sun dip below the Mediterranean horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. Eleanor sat in a cell in Connecticut, wearing orange, telling inmates about a life that no longer existed. Tiffany St. James was married to a plastic surgeon in Miami, pretending to be 22. But here, on the water, the truth remained. The Hoyer legacy of cruelty had died. In its place was something stronger, something built not on bloodlines or mergers, but on the ferocious, unbreakable will of a mother who refused to bow, and a father who finally learned how to stand tall. Come on, Serena said, pulling him toward the stairs. Leo wants to steer the boat. Arthur says it's okay if you help him. Ronald laughed. Captain Leo, Lord help us. He's a Hart, Serena winked. He knows where he's going. Ronald followed her down the stairs, leaving the ghosts of his past in the wake behind them, sailing forward into a future that finally, truly, belonged to him. And that is the story of how Eleanor Hoyer played the ultimate game of chess against her son's ex, only to realize she was playing against a grandmaster. She thought money was power, but she forgot that a mother protecting her children is the most dangerous force on earth. If this story had you hooked, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. It helps the channel more than you know. And if you want more stories about karma, revenge, and justice served cold, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. What would you have done if you were Serena? Would you have forgiven Ronald? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.